Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The Russian army, overwhelmed by the Ukrainian attacks, is pulling back on all fronts and waving the white flag, embarrassing Putin. For the Russian army, the Ukrainian lands are completely turning into a hell pit, and the Russian soldiers have three options to get out of this pit. Either surrender by showing the white flag to the Ukrainian army, or die, or escape from the front and be captured in Russia. Considering the opportunities offered by the Ukrainian state to the surrendering Russian soldiers, surrendering may be very tempting for the Russian soldiers. We will soon examine the stunning details of the devastating blows dealt to Putin's last campaign by the helpless surrender of the Russian troops to the Ukrainian army in Kherson. Having run out of options in the war between Ukraine and Russia, Russian leader Vladimir Putin slowly began to play his last trump card. The ruthless authoritarian leader Putin, who forced the already tired Russian army to fight on the Ukrainian fronts, did not give up conducting offensive operations in Ukraine despite the losses suffered by the Russian army. Especially on the Ukrainian southern fronts, Russian troops made several unsuccessful offensive attempts. But the Ukrainian heroes managed to finish these attacks before they even started, and managed to push the Russian troops towards the southern borders of Ukraine. In the Kherson region in southern Ukraine, Zelensky's Lions continued to give the Russian troops a hard time by maximizing their counterattack. In the Kherson region, about 25,000 Russian soldiers were stranded in the past weeks. There are still thousands of Russian soldiers stuck in southern Ukraine at the moment. President of Ukraine Zelensky stated that the Ukrainian operations will continue rapidly until the invading troops in this region are expelled from the border. It is claimed that Russian troops contacted the Russian administration to withdraw from Kherson Oblast. The Russian administration stated that these claims are not true and that the Russian army still has enough power to put pressure on Ukraine. But there was such a scandal in Kherson Oblast that the whole world just focused their attention on Kherson. A Russian BMP-2 tank is seen descending a grassy hill in the Kherson region, near the base where the Russian troops are located. It's noted by Ukrainian soldiers that one of the Russian personnel in this tank came out and waving a white flag. First of all, the Ukrainian heroes who consider this event as a trap are completing all their preparations in the region. But as the Russian tank approaches, it's understood that other Russian soldiers also have white flags in their hands. Russian troops waiting around the Russian tank with white flags in their hands begin to shout, "We surrender." Shocked by the shocking images, the Ukrainian soldiers take the weapons of the Russian soldiers who surrendered in the Kherson region and put them in their vehicles safely. This scandalous submission, which took place near the Kherson Russian base, is enough to disgrace the Russian administration once again. The Russian administration used an annexation decision for 4 regions of Ukraine, including the Kherson region, in the past weeks. The Russians who made an annexation decision for Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia regions fell into a rather ridiculous situation after this event. In addition, Russian leader Vladimir Putin announced this annexation decision with an official ceremony and was quite assertive about it. But the Russian administration, who lost Liman 24 hours after the annexation decision, experienced the first shock. Afterwards, the Moscow administration, which was shocked by the surrender of the Russian troops in the Kherson region, is no longer expected to insist on the annexation decision. The annexation decision announced by the Russian administration had already been harshly criticized by many world states. The annexation decision of the Russians, which was not accepted by any state or official institution, is deemed invalid depending on the current course of the war. At present, in the city of Liman, which the Ukrainian heroes bravely recaptured, there are still the corpses of those who died in the huge 5,000-strong Russian troops. The fact that the Ukrainian heroes made such rapid advances in the southern region worried the Russian administration. The Ukrainian army has almost reached the Crimea right now, and the Crimea region is very important for Russians. At the same time, Crimea is indispensable for the Ukrainian President Zelensky. In every statement he made, Zelensky states the importance of Crimea with these chilling words. "The war started in Crimea, and it will end in Crimea." Will these words of the Ukrainian president come true later in the war? Even the possibilities that Zelensky mentions are very dangerous for the Russian administration. If the Russians lose Crimea, the Ukraine war will be seriously affected. In fact, according to some rumors, Russia's loss of Crimea means losing the Ukraine war. That's how important Crimea is for the Ukraine-Russia war. Ukrainian heroes continue their work at full speed to get the Crimea back. Ukrainian President Zelensky is considering concentrating many of his military units. Most of the world's states are also making statements that Ukraine can take Crimea from the hands of the Russians. In particular, the U.S. government continues to support Ukraine in this regard. The U.S. government's latest aid package for Ukraine includes long-range missile systems, HIMARS. The Ukrainian army is preparing for a very large-scale operation on Crimea and its surroundings, thanks to the military assistance to be provided by the USA. These possibilities that make the Russian administration sweat and the dangers of Ukraine on Crimea for the future push the leader Vladimir Putin to do something about this issue. Vladimir Putin wants to continue the implementation of the mobilization decision announced throughout Russia at full speed. Because if Putin does not replace the losses in the Russian army as soon as possible, it's unlikely that he will have a say in the Crimea. That's why Vladimir Putin started to give signals that he would increase the number of volunteers to join the Russian army from 300,000 to 1 million with a mobilization decree. With the mobilization decision he declared to change the course of the war, Russian leader Vladimir Putin drove the volunteer citizens who joined the Russian army to the forefront of the war like a pawn. Volunteer Russian citizens who joined the Russian army and were sent to Ukraine after a very short basic training in military matters could not exert an influence on most of the Ukrainian fronts. Leader Vladimir Putin recruited many volunteer soldiers from the minority republics of the Russian Federation. But Putin's attempt did not succeed either. The Russian army came to the point of disintegration despite Vladimir Putin's declaration of mobilization. Top Russian generals awaited the dreary end of the Ukrainian war with no hope. Russian citizens, on the other hand, were very uneasy about the situation. The vast majority of the Russian local population had already begun to leave Russia as soon as the mobilization decision was announced. Now, the thought of increasing the number of volunteer Russian soldiers to 1 million makes Russian citizens very nervous. It is quite curious where Vladimir Putin will find these 1 million volunteer citizens. Minority republics affiliated with the Russian Federation also oppose mobilization. Dozens of protests against mobilization were held, particularly in Dagestan. Russian Guard regiments could not even enter Dagestan to recruit volunteers. A Dagestan citizen protested the Russian mobilization by lying on the connecting road of the highway bridge. Encouraged by this situation, other Dagestan citizens took part in all-out actions against the Russian mobilization. The Russian leader has a very difficult job in the later stages of the war. Both the unstoppable advance of Ukraine and the loss of the Russian army from all areas in which it entered the conflict are upsetting Vladimir Putin's plans. Let's see what awaits us in the future in Crimea. That's all from us for now. Thank you for watching us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to be informed about hot developments, and it will be enough to open the bell to receive new video notifications automatically. Stay cool.